And right now, we're on our keynote on bringing trust back to banking and capital markets. We're joined by our speaker, Frederik Gregaard, the Chief Executive Officer, Cardano Foundation. Well, Frederik is based in Zurich, Switzerland. He's a blockchain industry veteran and will focus on adoption and growth, such an increasing enterprise use cases in priority industries across key geographies, advancing the Cardano's foundation's core missions, leading the foundation's diverse global team, and defining the strategic direction of the organization as Cardano approaches a crucial development milestone. So, ladies and gentlemen, with this, I'd request our speaker to join us on the stage and screen. Thank you so much, Frederik, for joining us on the World Blockchain Summit. I'm not going to hold you to start with your conversation. Please take it forward. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. So I'll share a few slides just to frame it a bit. Sometimes it's easier. It will only be around 10 minutes, and then I'm hoping we can do a couple of questions. I'm always open for that. I think it makes it interesting for everybody. So let me just see if I can actually get that to work.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as Frederik rightly said, that if you have any questions, do type it in the Q&A tab while we are having the conversation open. Post his 10 minutes of open conversation, which he'd love to engage with the audience for that. So thank you so much, Frederik, for joining us. Well, we just request you to press the share screen option and select the presentation in the open view, and we can start.
All right, so I'm hit by a very nice firewall here, so I'll just start.
Apologies.
Unfortunately.
Okay.
So anyway, what I want to speak about is really how to bring trust back into banking and capital markets. And I think it's really a little bit of a shame here is I wanted to show you some beautiful slides around how to do that. But what the fight really is about is trust versus utility, or trust and utility. Now, what I mean about that is that the trust aspects in banking and capital markets is very much around, very classical deeds. How do I protect my assets? How do I know that the money are there when I need it? And the utility part is really much around, what can we actually use capital markets and banking for? Now, on the utility side, everything we do, from the watch we're wearing to the tie we're having on, everything is soaked into financial services. And over the last about 10 years since the last financial crisis, what we've seen is the regulators has basically composed a lot of regulation, a lot of protectionism around how we do banking and capital markets. And that's basically led to, let's say, a minus degree of what banking and capital markets actually is and can be. So what's really interesting around that is, would there be a way we can actually break out of that momentum? Can we break out of actually, what is banking? Is it more than just current accounts, a little bit of lending, and basically having the ability to do some transactions and savings, right? Or can it also go much further? But let's look at the trust aspect first. And then in a couple of minutes, I'll try again to see if I can get this sharing to work, right? But when we speak about trust is super hard for many people to actually explain. But specifically around banking and capital markets, trust has around, at least for me, 3 words around it. One is predictability. The second is accountability. And the third is transparency. Now, thinking about those 3 words, it is very clear that since the last financial crisis and now since COVID or the global pandemic, depending on how we will choose to frame it, predictability and accountability has not really been some of the things we have seen when we look into capital markets and banking. So isolated speaking, the commercial banking and the retail banking has very much, just been on the bandwagon of digital adoption. But what really hasn't been seen so much is, what about central banking? What about the aspect of all of this quantitative easing, all of these help packages, all of this printing currencies? What does that actually mean? And we've seen actually also that a lot of the population and a lot of the actors in society is starting to have some questions to the institutions. So they're basically questioning, is these institutions actually acting on the best will of me as a citizen, or me as a community, or me as a country or a city? And that creates some very large questions. But before we go into those questions around that accountability, the third word around transparency is very important, because what the internet really brought us was the ability to trade with everybody everywhere around the globe at any time. So that allowed us actually to move assets and move value and counter or have an exposure to people we never ever met, and actually people we never did any kind of due diligence on. So we actually accepted that centralized entities are doing a really good due diligence, or we accepted that community-based platforms allow us to kind of get an idea if we can trust somebody on the other end of the globe. Now that leads us very much to talk about, one quote I like a lot at the moment, and that is, trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices. When it's absent, everybody notices. So if you think, 8-9 months back about how you moved around in society, we kind of trusted that the governments, we trusted the medical sector, we trusted, that, the worst thing that could happen was we got a little bit of a flu and so on. But suddenly we had a total lockdown. We had a common experience where suddenly we start distrusting, what can we actually do? Because there is not a lot of solid knowledge out there. And that is basically then accelerated by the fact that when we go on the global internet, it's really hard for us to find out what is the truth and what is not the truth. Now, in enterprises, specifically around banking and capital market, but also in anything else which is really dear to our heart, being that, the house we own, being that, our reputation and so on, we basically always come back to one thing. That trust layer is something we have manufactured. So we manufactured the trust. So when you think about it, if you go from zero trust to abundant trust, these intermediaries we have created in the last 200 years can bring us to a certain part of that journey. They cannot bring us the whole way, but just to a certain part of that journey. The last bit of that journey is something we tend to mitigate from person to person. So we meet people, we are, we are interacting with people. We go to the house we want to buy. We look at the bricks and so forth. We go maybe to the intermediaries who's brokering that trust to try and basically do that. Now, the problem, or not the problem, but the challenge we are facing today is that these trust layers, these intermediaries, are all centralized entities. They're all, from a data perspective, from a governance perspective, they're all very central. Now, this gap is getting bigger and bigger as emerging technologies are emerging, such as blockchain technology, AI, etc. But also the business models are changing, not only with the emergence of Uber and all of these very nice business models, right? But the trust layer is hugely expanding. Now, how do we actually go into a world like that? Now, what we did around couple of 100 years back when we started inventing these centralized trust layers was we started with the assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. That means that we go into every kind of large business transaction or any kind of large deal, whether that is a marriage, so we're getting married, or any kind of other large transaction, we go in with the assumption I cannot trust the other party. So how do I actually then manufacture that trust layer? Now, the beauty of this, if you think about it, is that we are now in a situation for the first time in human history where we actually have an option of trusting something who is not necessarily 100% centralized. Now, I do believe that, with Sergey just speaking before, most of you would have a really good idea about what decentralization really means. But do we already today have a new financial and social operating system which allows you and me to represent value, identity, and governance all in one place? Now, that is the highlight and what I really want to speak about. So when I'm speaking about that, I wanted to just give it one last shot to see if I really want to share just one slide with you today. That would really allow me to really pin this really nicely. And obviously, I seem not to be able to do that. Okay, so I will try and send it to the organizers, and then we can have a look at it. So now you have to really pay attention because this is it's a quite complicated slide. So in reality, what we have is we have what I call a trust layer, and then we have a product layer or a utility layer. So remember what I said in the start, banking and capital markets is really, if you nail it down to two things, is really around trust and utility. Trust is the ability to do those three phrases I said before, and the utility is that it actually makes sense for us to interact with them in what kind of format. Now, on the trust layer side, we have a couple of things which is unfortunately extremely well working. You can argue back and forth, right? We all have our own personal opinions. And then we have some things who's not very well working in the blockchain reality. So when we look into the blockchain reality and we look at two things where we definitely see a huge gap, it is within what we call digital identity and economic identity. And here, actually, the established institutions, we have a feeling that we are very good at identifying people. Now, all of the advantages from blockchain or from decentralized distributed technology really come from the fact that we can actually trust people, right? We can trust the code. We can, we don't need necessarily to trust a centralized entity. Now, how do you connect the blockchain world to a person? That is the large question, and that's the question we haven't solved yet. And therefore, we always tend to go back to these kind of questions about, how do I put code into a person? And now, we solved it very well in banking capital markets, we solved it in insurance, we solved it in governmental IDs. But when we come to the fact that we actually increase the, when we increase the level and we basically say, okay, how far can we go? When we look at COVID, for instance, we now increased it to such a level that, frankly speaking, we don't trust anybody anymore. We used to trust the doctor, we used to trust the neighboring country or the neighboring city, but now we actually know for a fact that what the coronavirus really means is that we need, digital identities to prove if we got a vaccination or not. So this part here is where we can say is very, very nascent, where we stand today. Now, the other part, which is, very interesting around the trust layer, is that we came a long way with regard to risk, legal and compliance and international standards. But the matter of the fact is that we had 200 years to build up the existing world. And we actually have a really good idea about cross-border trade and cross-border legal and regulation. What we don't have a very good idea about is how does that actually mean when we put that into a world of code where we basically have no countries. We don't necessarily need to have a legal incorporation. What would that actually mean? So here we see a huge gap from what we call the trust layer and to what, between the trust layer and the blockchain world and the trust layer in the old world. Now we do have a system here which we can mitigate that with. So I think that's fantastic, but we are not that far yet. And we really have to do a lot of work doing that. The other part is on governance. The recent elections showed that one more time, but the matter of the fact is the governance on chain, such as governance off chain or in the normal world, both has huge problems. And I think that's it. Those two things, if we can solve digital identity and governance and merge that with the immutable blockchain technology, we actually have the opportunity to create a new social operating system and a financial operating system, which could make the world a lot better place. So let me just try and send the slides now to the host and see if that actually works. That would be amazing. So we can actually frame that a lot better than we are doing today. And then that will just take me a second. Sorry about that.
Sure. Frederik, I've just provided the email ID to you. If you could just share it out there, we'd love to present it from our end. Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, also if you may have any questions for our speaker, Frederik, do keep messaging us on the Q&A tab on your screen. We'll pass it on to the speaker at the end of the session if time allows. Well, we're just going to be waiting for the screen share to happen. Also, Frederik, we do have 2 questions from the audience. So whenever you're more comfortable, we'll take those up as well. But
We can take
first
them
off,
now when I'm just sending the slides to you. We can just
perfect.
do it now. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. So one of the questions, Frederik, which has come up is that what are the 3 main priorities in your role with Cardano for 2021? And what's the update on Shelley is one of the questions which has come in from the audience right now.
Oh, okay. So that's not very related to to banking and capital markets as such, but yeah, the update on Shelley is it goes really well, right? So Shelley is fully deployed. Now there's a couple of aspects of Shelley we would like to improve, but if you look at the block distribution right now is 68%, created by stake pool operators. So depending a little bit on what lens you're taking, I would be so bold to say that we are probably the most decentralized protocol out there now. Now, yes, we can look at it from different lenses and so on. So I think Shelley is actually working really well. Let me be bold on the other one. The main basically priorities I have right now is to ensure that we have a high performance team who can actually create the impact we need in the world to move forward. And to do that, we need to kind of look at 2 kind of aspects. The first one is let's call it monetary and fiscal policy or instruments around DeFi and investment banking. So currently, you can argue that what we have with Cardano today is probably equal what Bitcoin has. And now I know I'm going to make a couple of people very angry. But from a utility perspective, it is extremely close. However, there's a couple of advantages with the Cardano protocol, and there's a couple of disadvantages. But if we look at the advantages, I think actually we will have the ability potentially to make Cardano something close to the world's new reserve currency if we work very focused on that. But to do that, we actually need to go into that famous slide I was, haunting all of you with, because we actually need to solve some of the layer 1 and layer 2 problems. And that's not very hard to solve. It's just meaning that we need to have some forensics tools. We need to have some good custody solutions. We need to allow everybody around the world to be banking ADA as they will be banking any kind of fiat and protect themselves against the inflation risk. We need to ensure that the interoperability works and so on. So it's really people, layer 1 and layer 2 around that first equation. And then at a later stage is really to ensure when the protocol is fully decentralized and fully community-led, that the community has all of the information, all of the support to explore what's really possible to take much better decisions and creating a much more effective decentralized world where we empower the individual by them actually taking control over their own identity and using different kind of on-chain governance models to create a much more fair society where we get together as humans to solve these problems. So the last one, of course, is a huge chunk, and that's probably going to be longer than my seat as a CEO. But nevertheless, I think that's very important.
Sure. Also, Frederik, we're just awaiting your presentation. I've also provided another alternate email ID as well. If someone could just mail on your behalf. Frederik, there's another question from the audience, which is what's the relation between Allegra, Gauguin, and Voltaire, and what is its utility? I've just passed it on to you in the chat as well for your reference. Could you also answer the same?
Yeah. Now it gets a little bit more technical, huh? In reality, Shelley really brought us to a stage where we can really do staking, right? Now, a lot of people is then asking about, what about Goku? And we actually started launching Goku already. So the first things you saw was the metadata, which came live, and we have the first companies actually live already with supply chain solutions, with from a technical perspective. So there's a lot of, let's say, utility already in the Goku era. But the real thing which everybody, of course, is waiting on is smart contracts. And not just smart contracts in terms of interoperability with other smart contracting languages and mainstream languages, but really Pluto's and the smart contracting language around the Haskell we've done. Now, what's really important about that is that it's actually mathematical proven. So one of the biggest issues I had in my life with PwC was, one thing is that you can do a smart contract and you can say, hey, when it's deployed and it's fully visible, it's fully transparent, everybody can look at it. But the problem is that if there's a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand lines of code in it, you actually have to be really good in architecture and coding to understand if it really does what it's supposed to do. And a lot of those smart contracts don't even have a really good description of what they're supposed to do on a real functional level. So the ability to actually, as a banker like me or as a regulator, to launch a asset-backed security by dragging 5 blocks of code together and then check that with a mathematical proof that it really does what it's supposed to do, and then you can launch it within 5 minutes, is going to be the enterprise mind-changing component, which I think the whole market is kind of looking for. Now, Voltaire is a different beast. So when we think about Voltaire, we think about first Voltaire on the ADA or on the protocol. So that's in essence, kind of, a governance model. So how are the future of the Cardano project actually going to be led in terms of, who can enforce a hard fork? How do we keep the community together? How do we have good governance on chain? What is the voting principle? Should there be different kind of voting principles for different parts of the infrastructure? And my opinion is a clear yes. I don't think that one part of governance fits all projects and fits all infrastructure. And as people are building projects on top of Cardano, they can then borrow either the ADA governance model or they can borrow other governance models and then come to the foundation and actually get best of practice in terms of how do you actually run good governance, if that is a voting system in a local country, or if that is how to set up oracles in the best way in terms of market data, or if that is how to distribute, a vaccine in a pandemic situation. So I think, that's where Voltaire comes in. I think Voltaire is a bigger chunk to kind of swallow because it's it's coming all the way back from the Greek philosophy, right? So how do we actually govern a society, or how do we govern important problems in the right way? And I think there is no right way really, but there is only good infrastructure who allows you to do the best choices. So at least the choice you're doing is being executed as you thought it would be. And I think that part is really important.
Sure. Thank you so much, Frederik. Right now, these are the 2 questions which have come, and there's another one which has just come in from the audience. It says that, can smart contract solution really replace clearinghouses? And are regulators really convinced? And what about the margin finance and cash movements?
Okay, so that's probably a bit more of an easy one to tackle, huh? So the short version of that is yes. Maybe not isolated smart contracts as such, because smart contracts only holds a part of the equation. But I guess the question goes more around if a third generation blockchain together with smart contracts can replace clearinghouses, and that is a no-brainer. Yes, it can, because it brings a lot more security into the equation. But then it comes into, what do you define as security? So in the old way of thinking about IT security, we're thinking about that security is a box. And if you understand all the vectors, the attack vectors to get into the box, you can control them and you can shut them off, you can actually run. But the whole idea about a clearinghouse is that you have multiple participants who actually trade with each other without actually needing to understand the economic identity or the background of that person or that entity, and that smoothen up trading and access a more effective capital markets. And that's exactly basically what blockchain and smart contracts would be able to replace, if you are of the opinion, which I am obviously, that you can trust code, and if you accept that we would need some regulatory smoothening to get to that place, right? Because currently speaking, most regulatory regimes does not really allow that we move everything digital. It really still stands with that we need to kind of accept that there has to be a legal entity or private person we can keep liable. So this is the legal regime versus the DAO kind of thing. And the other part of it, there's a lot of countries and a lot of places who don't even accept that, like digital signatures. So they really say we have to go to the old-fashioned John Hancock, right? And here we could actually, we could do a lot just by bilateral agreements. So if we have bilateral or trilateral agreements, we could actually have all of the day-to-day contracting done in a subset. So I think there's legal, ways to solve this. So definitely, we can definitely do that. And the last part of the question, I just forgot now. Maybe you can remind me.
Yes, sure. So it was about the smart contract solution really replacing clearinghouses. The second part was, are regulators really convinced? And the third part, which you're referring to, is about the margin, finance, and cash movements. What about them?
Yeah, so the regulators are not convinced yet, huh? They need more education and so on. And when we start speaking payments and cash movements, it's actually kind of simple, right? So the technology we have already today, without talking about blockchain, actually works really well. And we could speed that up. I mean, there's no reason why we're not doing, shares or cash equities. We could settle and clear that in T+0. It's just the market don't want that. There's so many participants in the market who earn money on it. We can today actually send money from A to B in a matter of seconds using other technology stacks. We just chose not to do it because we are kind of having a business model on the back of that. When I say we, it's banking and capital markets, where there's a lot of safeties built in. So one of the things people don't really think about is, people actually do trust banks, but banks need to continue to earn that kind of trust. And, if a banker or a person does a mistake in the normal world, we can take back the money. So if I, hit a wrong zero on my account and I can, send 1 million instead of, 100 euros, right? I can actually call my bank and I can actually, claim back that transaction. In a true P2P settlement, as we know in blockchain, that really doesn't work. And now we're coming back into a basic premises of, how much do we believe in the individual? How much do we believe that we actually want to make people, we want to engage in people and we want to trust people that they actually can do their own transactions and be in charge of their own, not just transactions, but also their own identity. There's a big flip off between saying, yes, I want to be in charge of my own identity, but also the other side of that coin saying, do I even trust myself to do that in the way I'm operating on a computer today? Good example is today, right? I mean, I had a great slide presentation. I was ready to do that, but suddenly I was not able to do that and share that in Zoom. And I'm pretty digital, right? So if that would have been a transaction, or if that would have been my digital identity, I would be unencrypting or giving away, codes that a government could actually see into my books. How safe, how secure, how much would I trust the system then? So there's a lot to be done also in terms of user experience and making these things as easy as tying your shoelaces. And let's face it, crypto and blockchain today is extremely complicated. It's not easy. And a lot of us is actually having a little bit of, heart pumping when we're doing, yield farming, or when we're doing, staking, or if we're sending crypto transactions, because we know it cannot be called back. There is no consumer facing hotline where I call and ask for help. And I think a lot of people underestimate that in the infrastructure today.
Sure. Frederik, also there's another question which has just come in is who are the leaders right now in adopting blockchain for capital markets? Now, that's a question which has come in from one of our delegates. Would you be open in sharing the same?
So I would not mention any names right now today because, frankly speaking, it would be rude because I do not have the capacity to monitor the worldwide market and all of the great people who have great projects. But I would say there is 2 players who really stand up for me where I'm saying, wow, that's amazing. One is a US-based bank who's unfortunately been working a lot too much in a centralized blockchain environment. But I think they really understood, what is the pain points and how do we apply crypto and a blockchain technology to solve that. The other one is one which probably none of you, dear listeners and viewers, have heard about. And it is so that most of you probably own funds, so mutual funds in some kind of capacity. And there is a huge supply chain problem in the fund industry around redemptions, subscriptions, and so on. There's actually being sent trillions of dollars around every single week in that space. And there's actually one provider there, which is a UK provider, who chose a decentralized, or as much as we can call it, decentralized protocol, and basically made a copy paste of the whole infrastructure. So when you think about it, all of these asset managers and all of these very conservative banks and even central bank and pension funds is suddenly already plain vanilla dealing with a counterpart who's already moved, large chunks of their infrastructure to a blockchain-based infrastructure, and they now run dual landscapes, and they are now very close to going live with that. And I think that they want to do that in such a conservative environment, and that they see the added value for that. I think that's just simply amazing. So that's, let's say, the two projects I'm really like, wow, that's very great. Then there's a lot of projects, frankly speaking, most of the CBDC projects I don't really hold for real, because they really didn't understand what is the really need. And the need is not digitalizing money, it's about smart money. It's about enabling us when we have a pandemic to give aid to the people who really need aid, and not just call in an army of auditors to actually audit your balance sheet and actually create more work from you, because actually what you need capital right now because you're not allowed to work. And then that comes back to economic identity. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people except Cardano who is really much ahead on that. And that's also one of the reasons I'm so excited and chose to join Cardano, because I think they really nailed the spot there. It's not about how many transactions you can do per second. It is really about economic identity and then governance as a service. If you get those two things right, you get adoption.
Sure, perfect. Thank you so much, Frederik. What engaging questions we got from the audience. And those are the few questions which our audience had sent. Frederik, I'll just request you, since we really wanted to show that slide, if your team is open to that, could you please, I've just shared another email ID because my team couldn't receive your previous email. If you'd like, I'll just wait a moment further. And if you can just send that email on the one email ID which I've just mentioned right now in the chat. If you're open to that, please, I'll present it.
Yeah, let me just do that.
Yes, please. I'm just waiting for your email. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the World Blockchain Summit Global Edition. And on the other side, we're going to be having a great conversation. There's going to be a short break as well for all of you to regenerate and join us back. But we'd really request you to stay tuned. And what an exciting round of questions that was. Thank you to all the audience members for engaging so brilliantly today with us. So ladies and gentlemen, we're just right now on this wonderful session, and thank you once again for staying tuned. Also remember, keep hashtagging WBS Global as our hashtag, that's one word. And stay tuned, as we're going to be having a lot of exciting conversations around our theme in just about a few minutes. So Frederik, were you able to send the email right now?
Yeah, I cut it down so there's basically only one slide, and now it does not give an error from your email server at least. So now I went to Rohit.
Okay.
Is that the right one?
Because I still haven't, neither my team is getting the email. Let me still reload the site, and let's just try and figure it out if anything can be done at this moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, some great questions came in this round. It was brilliant to have all of you participate. And that's what we love about the events at TrestCon, is that there's so much of brilliant interaction which comes across. So thank you once again for that. Well, apologies, Frederik, I'm yet not able to receive the email, but wait, just a second. Yes, I did receive your slide. Frederik, I did. Okay. Frederik, I received your slide. Let me just try and share it. Just allow me a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've just received the slide, and that's an important one we'd like to share with the audience. Okay. Perfect. Share screen. Start share. Frederik, is that okay?
Yeah, I don't see all of it, but that's okay. I hope everybody can.
Is it fine?
Yeah. So basically, what I was trying to explain is, the trust versus utility in the new infrastructure. And if you look at the green bubble is really what we call the digital challenger banks, and all the banks is trying the digital, adoption game, right? And trying to find utility with their clients. But, it's just not sufficient. And what I marked in there is the crypto version of that. So that's where we actually already now see that there is crypto offering, from DeFi to trading to asset allocation and so on. So this is what draws a lot of us into the crypto space, that we actually have products we can do. And basically whatever is, dark blue has a high degree of maturity, and whatever is really white has a very low degree of maturity. And again, we can argue a little bit back and forth on that. But what is important here is that this, both in the classical world and the crypto world, has to grow. We have to go much more beyond what the regulator has said, what is finance and banking, because it's actually a whole supply chain methodology about how we interact. If you can put that in one word, it will probably be that the fundamental currency of commerce is not the US dollar or the euro, is trust, right? And that's something you have to grow. And where we work very much is on the left side, is the trust layers. And here we see, mining and stake pools is actually having a high maturity. We can discuss a lot about the legal and compliance. I put it here in blue, but actually it's I would probably put it down maybe towards a much more of a lighter color, because we thought we had a really good idea about proof of work, but it turns out the proof of stake is actually, from a regulatory perspective, looked at completely different. So here maybe it could have a double color. But what we see here is the digital ideas and the oracles and market data is some of the things which is very, very far behind in the crypto space. And this is stuff which is plain vanilla since 100 years in the financial markets. So I think there's these two layers. One is an infrastructure layer, and one is really a product/utility layer. And too much focus in my world is actually happening around the product/utility layer, and too little around the trust layer. When we solve the trust layer equation, so when we get all of that up to a level where that the decentralized third generation blockchains can operate, then we actually have the ability to shift the momentum in the adoption situation. And that's the day when we start speaking about that, like a Facebook don't need to ask a regulator to go live for 1 billion people on a shared ledger system, right? Because then there is actually a really good understanding and a really good framework for actually operating that. And that's the part where we also then at one part have to actually talk to ourselves and say, are we really ready as individuals to take how much responsibility of our own lives? Most of us says, yes, we are ready. It must be better than the centralized world, but that requires a lot of user experience and a lot of education to get there. And therefore, I think these conferences like this is so important that we address that. And not all of that can be solved with math. It's actually about people. It's about cultures.
Sure. Thank you so much, Frederik. Well, I'll just stop the screen share, but I'm so glad that we could bring that up. And thank you so much for your time once again.
More than welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you.